Sign this, Dad. It's just a formality. My daughter slid the envelope across my kitchen table like she was handing me a takeout menu. She didn't even look up from her phone. I looked at the papers inside. Power of attorney. Full financial authority. Her name printed neatly where mine used to be enough. I smiled. I told her I'd think about it. She had no idea I'd already called my lawyer that morning. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a contracts attorney in Halifax. The kind of work where you read every line twice and trust nothing that arrives in an envelope without warning. I retired 4 years ago, after my wife Barbara passed. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The kind of grief that doesn't announce itself properly. It just settles into your house and rearranges everything. After Barbara died, I was lost in a way I hadn't expected. I'd always been the organized one, the careful one. But grief has a way of making you want to hand things over, to stop caring so much. My daughter, I'll call her by what she was to me then, my little girl, because that's how I still thought of her. She stepped in quickly. Too quickly, I know now. She and her husband moved back to Nova Scotia from Toronto about 8 months after the funeral. They said it was to be closer to me. They said they were worried. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? She'd always been sharp, my daughter. Clever the way her mother was clever. Quick with words, good at reading a room. Her husband is quieter. An account manager for a logistics company. Pleasant enough at Christmas dinners. I never had a strong feeling about him either way, which I suppose should have told me something. They moved into a rental in Dartmouth. I helped with first and last month's rent because the Toronto apartment had drained their savings, $2,600. I didn't mind. That's what fathers do. Then her car needed work. Then they had an unexpected dental bill. He'd cracked a molar and the work wasn't covered. Then their lease went up and could I help with a couple of months while they found something more affordable? Each time, I helped. Each time felt reasonable on its own. I didn't add it up for a long time. When I finally did, the number was over $40,000 in 18 months. I want to be clear. I'm not a man who gives money and expects it back from family. Barbara and I talked about that. You help because you can, not to keep score. But there's a difference between helping and being used as a source. It took me too long to understand that my daughter had stopped seeing me as her father and started seeing me as a resource with a limited shelf life. The first real signal came on a Tuesday in February. I'd gone to the Scotia Bank branch on Spring Garden Road to move some funds around. Nothing complicated, just shifting money between my RRSP and a savings account. The teller, a young woman who'd helped me a few times before, paused after pulling up my file. "Mr. Walter," she said, keeping her voice low, "there's a note on your account. A joint inquiry was submitted last week. Did you authorize someone to inquire about your account status?" I had not. When I asked who had submitted the inquiry, she couldn't tell me the name directly, but she said I should contact the branch manager if I had any concerns. I drove home with my hands tight on the steering wheel the whole way. That evening, I went through my filing cabinet. The old green one Barbara had hated, said it made the study look like a government office. I found 3 pieces of mail I didn't remember opening. 2 were from my investment firm. 1 was from the provincial government, related to my pension file. All 3 had been opened and resealed. Not well. You could tell if you knew what to look for, and I knew what to look for. I didn't say anything. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table where Barbara and I used to do the crossword on Sunday mornings, and I started thinking like a lawyer again. I called an old colleague the next morning, Martin, 28 years practicing estate and elder law in Halifax, the kind of man who's seen every variety of financial betrayal a family can produce. I told him what I'd noticed. He listened without interrupting, which is a skill most people never develop. When I finished, he said, "Walter, do you have a current power of attorney in place?" I did. It named Barbara. She was gone, which meant, technically, I had no POA active, and anyone who knew that would know I was vulnerable. "How long until your daughter asks you to sign something?" Martin said. I told him I thought it would be soon. "Don't sign anything," he said. "Call me the moment she does." She asked 3 weeks later. That Tuesday at my kitchen table with the envelope and the phone and the look on her face like this was a completely routine thing that any sensible older person would handle without making a fuss. I smiled and told her I'd think about it. What she didn't know was that Martin and I had already spent 2 weeks building something careful. The first thing I did was open a new checking account at a different institution, a credit union on Quinpool Road, under my name only, with a new address for correspondence directed to Martin's office. I transferred the majority of my liquid assets there quietly, over several small transactions spaced a week apart. Nothing that would flag anything, just a retired man moving his money around, which retired men are entirely allowed to do. The second thing I did was install a small camera in the study. Not hidden, exactly. It sat on the bookshelf behind a row of Barbara's old gardening books, but not obvious either. Martin suggested it. He'd seen cases where things were later disputed and documentation mattered enormously. The third thing I did was go through every piece of mail for the previous 6 months and photograph anything that had been tampered with. 7 envelopes in total. My daughter had a key to my house. I'd given it to her when she first moved back in case of emergency, and she visited often enough that I hadn't noticed the pattern until I was looking for it. The fourth thing, and this was Martin's idea entirely, was to create what he called a consent document. A piece of paper that looked, to an untrained eye, like a preliminary POA agreement. It was not. It was a document that, if signed, would actually do nothing legally, but would demonstrate clearly that my daughter understood she was signing a financial authority document. That she wasn't confused about what she was doing. That she intended it. Intent matters enormously in court, Martin reminded me. I didn't like the idea at first. It felt like a trick. Martin said, "Walter, she already opened your mail. She already made inquiries at your bank without your knowledge. She is not confused about what she's doing. You're not tricking her. You're letting her show you who she is." That reframed it for me. I called my daughter a week after she'd left the envelope and told her I was ready to discuss the paperwork. I asked her and her husband to come for dinner Saturday. She sounded so pleased on the phone. I made beef stew, Barbara's recipe, the one with the Guinness and the pearl onions, because I needed something to do with my hands in the hours before they arrived. They came at 6. Her husband brought a bottle of wine, a Niagara Pinot Noir, which I thought was a nice gesture until I realized he probably assumed he'd be living on my assets within the year, and a $20 bottle of wine was the least he could offer. We had dinner. We talked about their plans to maybe buy a place in the valley. We talked about my grandson's hockey. We talked about everything except the envelope for the first 90 minutes, which I think was her strategy. Soften the room, make it feel like a normal family evening, then slide the documents in at the end when everyone's comfortable and the wine has done its work. She brought them out over dessert. The envelope, plus a new version. Thicker this time, more pages. She'd had someone look it over, she said. A friend who worked in finance. Everything was straightforward, she said. Just protection for me, really. She'd manage the accounts, make sure bills were paid on time, take that stress off my plate. I said, I had Martin look at the draft you left last time. She paused. Just half a second, but I've spent 31 years watching people's faces when something they didn't expect comes into the room. Martin, she said. Martin, I said. He had some thoughts. Actually, he drew up a counter-proposal. Something that might work better for all of us. I got up and went to the study. I came back with Martin's consent document, the one that looked like a preliminary POA agreement, but was not. I set it on the table. I watched her husband reach for it before she did, which told me something about who was driving this. He read it, she read it. I watched them exchange a look across my kitchen table, in the house where I raised her, at the table where her mother used to help her with homework when she was 9 years old. She signed it. He witnessed it. I poured more tea. I want to tell you that what happened next felt satisfying in some clean, simple way. It didn't. It felt like standing in a cold parking lot after something has already ended. Martin filed a formal complaint with the Nova Scotia RCMP Financial Crimes Unit 2 weeks later. The evidence was straightforward: unauthorized inquiries on my banking records, tampering with postal mail, which is a federal offense under the Canada Post Corporation Act, and the signed consent document demonstrating knowing intent to obtain financial authority. There was also the matter of a savings bond Barbara had kept in the filing cabinet, which had gone missing sometime in the previous year. We couldn't prove when it had been taken, but its absence was documented. The RCMP interviewed my daughter in March. Her husband retained a lawyer. There were several weeks of back and forth that Martin handled, so I didn't have to. In the end, she did not go to prison. The Crown prosecutor accepted a conditional discharge, no criminal record if she completed 2 years of probation, repaid the bond value, and had no further contact with my finances. Her husband received the same. It was less than I'd wanted and more than she'd expected, I think. She lost a position at the financial consulting firm where she'd worked part-time. The background review caught the RCMP investigation. That was not something I had arranged. It was simply a consequence. I changed the locks in April. I had the mail rerouted through a P.O. box. I updated my estate documents with Martin and named a charitable trust as the primary beneficiary for the time being. The IWK Health Center in Halifax, where Barbara had volunteered for 11 years. I felt she would have approved. My daughter called twice in the summer, both times from a number I didn't recognize. I answered the second time. She was crying. She said she didn't know how it had gotten so far. She said her husband had pushed her, that she'd been scared of their debt, and had made terrible decisions, and she was sorry. I listened to all of it. I didn't hang up. I told her that I believed she was sorry. I told her that sorry doesn't unlock a door that you chose to close yourself. I told her that I loved her the way I'd always loved her, completely and without condition, but that love and access are not the same thing, and she had spent 18 months confusing them. She asked if we could have dinner sometime. I said maybe, someday, when I was ready. I wasn't ready yet. I needed her to understand that the waiting wasn't punishment. It was just the natural distance that opens up when trust has to rebuild itself from the beginning, slowly, the way it should have been treated all along. I still make Barbara's stew on Saturday nights. I do the crossword in the morning. I walk along Point Pleasant Park in the afternoons when the weather allows, down by the water where the container ships come in. And I think about all the years I spent reading contracts line by line, looking for the clause that would hurt someone later. I never imagined I'd need those skills for my own family. But I'll tell you what I know now that I didn't know 4 years ago. Standing in a hospital corridor being told my wife had 11 weeks. Grief makes you want to hand things over. It makes you want someone else to carry the weight for a while. That's human. That's not weakness. What I should have understood sooner is that handing things over only works when you hand them to someone who isn't already counting what they'll keep. My daughter knew where every account was. She knew which investments I held, which institution, roughly what they were worth. She knew because I'd told her, over dinners, the way a father talks openly with his child, because he assumes that's safe. I don't think she started out planning to take from me. I think she started out scared of her own debt and told herself a story, that I had more than I needed, that she'd pay it back, that it was practically hers anyway someday. So what was the difference, really? And the story got easier to tell the longer she told it. That's how these things work, I think. Not usually with a villain sitting in a dark room calculating how to rob an old man. Usually with someone ordinary, someone you love, telling themselves a small lie until the lie becomes the whole landscape and they can't see past it anymore. I'm not excusing her. I'm just trying to understand it, the way I've tried to understand everything in my life. Carefully, honestly, without flinching from what's actually there. If you're watching this and you have a parent who's getting older, I want to say something directly to you. Talk to them. Not about their accounts or their assets or their estate plan. Just talk to them. Ask how they slept. Ask what they had for lunch. Ask if they've been out walking. Ask if they're lonely. Because lonely is where this starts, more often than you'd think. A person who isn't lonely doesn't need to hand anything over. A person who feels seen and accompanied carries their own weight more easily. My daughter could have just called me more. That's all. That's how simple the prevention was. And if you're watching this, and something in the story is hitting too close to home, if you're an older person and something feels off about a family member's behavior, about mail that's been moved, about conversations that veer strangely toward your finances, call someone, a lawyer, a trusted friend, your bank branch manager. Don't wait until you're sure. By the time you're sure, it's usually further along than you'd like. I caught this early enough. Not everyone does. My daughter sent a card at Christmas, handwritten, which surprised me. She said she was in therapy. She said she was working on understanding how she'd arrived at the choices she made. She said she missed her mother, and she missed me, and she was sorry for all of it. I put the card on the mantel, next to the photo of Barbara at Peggy's Cove, The summer before she got sick, her hair blowing sideways, laughing at something off camera that I can't remember anymore. I'm not ready for dinner yet, but I kept the card. That's where I am. That's where I'll stay for now, until something shifts, until I feel what needs to be felt. I've learned not to rush myself anymore. I spent a career reading the fine print so other people wouldn't get hurt. I think I've earned the right to take my time with the things that matter most. I've had a lot of time to think about what I'd call the through line of all this. The thing that connects where it started to, where it ended. What I keep coming back to is that my daughter didn't suddenly become someone else. She made a series of small decisions, each one a little worse than the last, and at no point did she stop and ask herself the question that matters most. What kind of person am I choosing to be right now? That question is the difference between a life you can look back on with some dignity and one you can't. It's not complicated, but it requires a habit of honesty that has to be built deliberately, over years the way you'd build anything that needs to hold weight. I raised her to have that habit. I thought I had anyway, and maybe I did once. But somewhere between the debt and the fear and whatever story her husband was telling her at the kitchen table in Dartmouth, she let the habit go. That's what I grieve most, I think. Not the money, not the open mail, not even the betrayal itself. I grieve the moment she stopped asking herself that question and started asking a different one instead. What can I get away with? The answer to that second question, it turns out, is very little. Because actions accumulate. Every opened envelope was a choice. Every unauthorized bank inquiry was a choice. Every dollar redirected was a choice. And choices compound the same way interest does, slowly at first, then all at once. By the time Martin and I sat down with the evidence, there were months of compounded choices sitting in front of us, documented, dated, undeniable. She had built a case against herself, one small decision at a time, without ever seeming to notice. That's the thing about integrity. You can't just summon it when the stakes are high. It has to already be there, built into the habit of how you move through ordinary days. And you can't protect it by hoping no one is watching. You protect it by behaving the same whether or not anyone is watching. I spent 31 years writing contracts on that principle. The other party will eventually read every line. Everything surfaces. What I want people to take from my story, if anything, is this: the intelligence it takes to scheme is wasted. It is genuinely wasted. My daughter is not a stupid woman. She understood enough about estate law to know what a power of attorney could do for her. She understood enough about banking to know how to make inquiries sound routine. She used real intelligence in service of something that was always going to fall apart, because things built on dishonesty always do. That intelligence could have been used to build something real. That's the tragedy of it. And for the older folks watching, I want to say this plainly. Grief is a door that people who want to take from you will try to walk through if you leave it open. That is not your fault. But it is your responsibility to know it, and to protect yourself anyway, not by becoming hard or suspicious of everyone, by staying clear-eyed, by keeping one trusted person, a lawyer, an old friend, a doctor you've known for years, who you talk to honestly and regularly. I had Martin. Martin made the difference. Strength, in the end, is not about not getting hurt. It's about deciding, after you've been hurt, that you will still be yourself. That you will not let what happened to you define what you become. I am still Walter. I still make barber's stew on Saturday nights. I still walk Point Pleasant Park in the afternoon. I kept my daughter's Christmas card. I am still, in every way that matters, the man I chose to be. That's the only thing no one can take.